Hi, I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach. Welcome to Improve Your Relationships. I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma. And when you have an insecure attachment style, what that means is it usually shows up in one of two ways, which is identified as preoccupied anxious attachment, and then the other one is called avoidant attachment. And then under avoidant attachment, again, these are insecure attachment styles, you could have a particular style that is either dismissive avoidant or fearful avoidant. If you err on the side, if you notice that when you have relationship distress, when there is uncertainty, when there is fear, and this is impacting you as a kind of anxiety, and a nervousness around intimacy, connection, and emotional relating. If you respond with the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, you're going to be overly focused on what the other person is or isn't doing, overly focused on what the person is or isn't thinking, overly focused on what your partner, the person you're dating, what he or she is or isn't saying. There's going to be a lot of internal conversations with yourself, monitoring these very minute interactions. He said this, she said that, then he did this, or maybe she ended up texting, but she took an extra 45 minutes before. So these kind of looking for evidence, acting like a detective, and that it's not total, it's not really your choice. You're not willfully trying to do this. There is a component where we fuel it, where we find ourselves so run down and so intensely impacted by the flood of emotions that increase our fear, increase our nervousness. And one way that we're responding is that the brain is just on overload, trying to make sense, trying to understand the patterns of relating. And that when there is a shift in the pattern, like if you have a anxious, preoccupied attachment style, what that means is that you're going to be very sensitive to the patterns and the frequency of relating, and notice when you get together and when you say goodbye and when you separate. Notice when you text and how frequently you text, and notice when someone calls and how when you call back, and you establish these patterns and these routines very quickly. And when the person that you're with, if they change the pattern, usually unaware, or if they're, for whatever reason, it could be completely innocent, like they just, life happens and they just don't call back, or if they purposefully are, choosing not to call as a way to create a little distance, you will notice these shifts. And it will fuel even more, technically, hormones and stress, adrenaline and other hormones being released into your nervous system. That's going to amp up the fear and amp up the anxiety. And your body is going, you're in your nervous system, you're going to feel on edge. And that's going to induce more preoccupied thinking, more speedy mind. And then your mind is racing. And you're like, well, why didn't she call? Or why we always meet on Friday? Why aren't we getting together on Friday? Now this is changing. So it becomes very easy when let's say your relationship is stressed and things are not going that well, and it appears to be going in the direction that the relationship might end, or you really don't think that this has that much of a life, it's not going to last very long, then what we start to do is we start to become very critical and suspect. We're cautious about the other person, but now we're also, because we're not getting our attachment needs met, and we have determined that this is probably not going to be a good fit for a relationship. And then we want the other person to be better at relating. We want the person to change. We want the the interactions to be a certain kind of intimacy, a certain level of relating, a certain type of closeness. And we amp up, we increase this monitoring, this being overly focused on the other person. Again, what is he or she doing? What is he or she thinking? And what is important to remember is that this, in fact, is making you unavailable. So up to this point, we find ourselves giving the other person a hard time, whether directly to their face or at least with ourselves or to our friends, complaining like this person seems unavailable, this person seems distant, how, they're not texting back enough, they're not calling, they don't appear to want to hang out this weekend, I'm getting a lot of mixed signals, this is just sending my anxiety through the roof. And instead of just ending the relationship or talking to the person directly and having a real negotiation about what the heck is going on here and are we or aren't we right for each other, instead of being able to accept the possibility of an ending, we find ourselves becoming more preoccupied to want to manipulate the situation in our favor. We got to figure out how to crack the code to get what we want, to make him or her change, to make the situation change. And if only we could come up with some new skill set, if only they could come up with some new skill set, and then we would be able to crack the code and we would have, better relating. So we are thinking about the other person. We are scrutinizing what they're doing. We are even maybe having conversation with that person of like, why don't you do this? Or can you do this? Or trying to have these rather heavy, serious conversations about the intensity of relating and how it's lacking and it's falling short. And usually if you're in the preoccupied, anxious camp as far as this attachment style, and you're protesting around not getting your needs met, usually you're going to see the other person as being the one at fault or being the one who's lacking. And so in clinical terms, in therapeutic terms, we'd call that they're the identified patient. We're trying to say, well, the problem is with him, the problem's with her. Of course, the problem's not with me. I really want to connect. I really want emotional closeness. I value calling more frequently. I value texting more frequently. I want emotional relatedness. But here is where there's this paradox. We're setting ourselves up to not get what we say we want. Because the more we're preoccupied on the other person, the more we're focused on demanding that we get some different level of connection, we are going to be pushing the other person away simultaneously. So we're going to invite more of the same behavior, more of the same distancing. However, let's imagine that the person you're with actually makes an effort and is really able to show up, as realizes, yes, I'm on board, yes, I want to connect with you, yes, I'm looking forward to sharing some time together. And so now let's go to that moment. Let's say that you're on a date, you're sharing some time together, and you are still in this preoccupied, anxious mode. You are still monitoring and looking for evidence to prove this person is distant and unavailable. What this means is you are not available. You are caught up in your own distractions that you are limiting your ability to be in the present moment. You're limiting your ability to go with the flow. You're limiting your ability to be available to the other person. So the thing that you are calling the other person out for, trying to, create a list of evidence of how he or she is unavailable to you. In fact, when you are distracted in your own rumination and distracted in your own worry, and distracted in trying to figure out how they're failing you, failing to connect in the proper way, you in fact are showing up as avoidant. You're showing up as unavailable. And this is how this becomes a rather chicken and an egg dynamic. You know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And this is also confusing because that when you tell the other person and you say, you know, you are unavailable, or you're behaving in ways that are you're connecting in infrequent ways, it's very possible that the other person will hold a mirror up in front of you and say, well, you're doing the same thing. I'm noticing this same kind of behavior in you. And what that means is they're noticing how you're not fully present. You're not really allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're showing up guarded and then being judgmental about how they're unavailable, but it's not going to make the other person, the person you're dating or your partner, it could be your spouse, it's not making that person feel safe and comfortable to want to connect with you. So this, you know, very quickly, this can turn into a cyclical process where we keep, you know, essentially running ourselves into the ground or running ourselves into a dead-end situation, a dead-end scenario. What's important, the goal here, is to be able to break this pattern and break this cycle. One way to do it is to stop focusing on the other person, to come back to really reminding yourself, how is this about you? How do you stay focused on yourself? And you have to then also honestly assess what are the skills that both you and your partner have, and be honest with yourself if the level of emotional relating is even possible with what you are hoping to achieve. You have to really assess, did you pick someone who does not share the same frequency of connection? It doesn't mean that someone is failing to offer emotional connection. Oftentimes it's very relative. It means that you have picked someone who has a different threshold or a different range, and when he or she is more with a person similar within their level of disclosure, their level of emotional connection, their level of vulnerability, then they're more compatible and it's not as extreme. It's very possible that you have picked someone where you yourself have a particular need to have emotional closeness at a frequency that goes beyond what they want. We need to, instead of turning this into a pathology, instead of turning this into some kind of diagnosis, how there's some problem here, it has a simple solution as far as compatibility of there is a relativeness in this. Some of this is just relative. We need to do the hard work and the honest work of pre-screening the people that we're choosing to be in relationship with, and essentially pre-screening ourselves. And what I mean by that is being honest with ourselves as far as the type of emotional connection that we're looking for. And we can't pretend and be dishonest with ourselves when we find someone that we relatively very quickly know they do not value the level of emotional connecting that we do. And then we cannot override that fact and pretend that we are going to change it, or they're going to change, or we're all going to learn some new grand relationship skill and go to therapy and begin relating, you know, dramatically differently. We need to have a bit more of a common ground, and whatever change and growth is occurring is happening a bit more organically because we're growing together, not because we're in a state of panic and urgency and fear, you know, scrambling to learn some new skills so that we hopefully could arrive at a place of minimal emotional connection. So hopefully that helps identify the different ways of discerning if you've picked the right person or not. So just to repeat, the main point of this video, of what I'm trying to share, is that oftentimes people who are preoccupied, anxiously attached, consider the other person unavailable. It's this being overly focused, look at how he or she is unavailable. And I'm trying to point out that you are unavailable when you are sucked into your preoccupied thinking. You're not really present. You're not really here. You're not really going with the flow. You are cautious and you are guarded. And then you find, then when we're in that situation, it's very possible you're holding back because you're waiting for the other person. But while you're holding back, you're simultaneously being avoidant. So keep this in mind. It becomes very, very challenging to sustain healthy relating if one or both people find themselves predominantly staying guarded, staying cautious, and holding back. And you might need to look at the degree to which you two are showing up in that place or in that way. I hope that this was helpful. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you like the content here and want to learn more and listen to more in upcoming videos. And then also if you want to learn more about me, please do by going to alanrobarge.com. Thank you.